One. Hi everyone, welcome to another AI conversation, and we're back with Professor Ben, who's mainstay. It's been some time. Hi, Prof. Ben, welcome back.
Hi, Doc. Good to be back.
Sige, so since our last conversation, which was sometime 2023, I think a lot has
Tagal na, ha?
changed, no? Maybe at least 6 months ago. Maalala ko when we were talking, parang Gen AI was still in its parang introductory stages. Ngayon,
Oo.
ang dami na nag-iba. You have the EU passed something already. There's all these
Mm.
principles and codes. Pero as we were discussing earlier, I felt it's good to revisit the basics again. And you were the inaugural guest of this podcast, so it's nice to bring it back to the center and start talking about AI again in the Prof Ben manner of things. So let's kick it off, no? I believe you wanted to pick up a thread on critical thinking. So how's things ba in the academia now? How's Gen AI adoption from where you sit?
Yeah, so in higher education, as you know, I've been teaching for more than 40 years, and our mission really is to train students to think critically. And it's always been an uphill battle, because
Ever
young
since.
people tend to be distracted by a lot of stuff. So getting them to really develop their tools, their mental tools, takes a lot of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So, bago pa dumating yung AI na yan, medyo challenge na talaga magturo ng critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to maybe spend some time with you precisely to discuss why it's so important to strengthen critical thinking in this day. Not just because AI is around, but because the elections in the US is around pretty soon.
Yeah.
Every major country in the world will be having elections within the next 3 years, and the kind of mental manipulation that we will be seeing will dwarf anything we've seen before. And a lot of this will be AI assisted. Ngayon, so I wanted to maybe go a little bit back. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, si Harry Frankfurt. He was
Mm-hmm.
a PhD from Princeton. He's a professor of philosophy. And he wrote this best-selling book sa Amazon on bullshit.
Hmm.
So it
Parang I've
was,
heard of that book.
yes, fantastic. I recommend it. I require this concept to all my students
Mm-hmm.
because for them to learn critical thinking, they have to know how to detect BS or
BS.
bullshit.
Absolutely.
Um, so for the rest of the talk, I'll just say BS, no? So it doesn't sound like I'm cursing the whole time. But Harry Frankfurt really published a bestseller, the title of which is On Bullshit. Now, how did he define bullshit? And this is something I think everyone should remember. For him, BS is when someone makes a statement and the objective of making that statement is to persuade a listener.
Okay.
Now, this is something we all do, of course. But what makes it BS, according to Frankfurt, is when the speaker of the statement has no regard for truth. Now, to say no regard does not mean you're hiding the truth, because somebody stating BS may not even know the truth. So he's not really lying because, a liar is somebody who knows the truth and who will hide it or who will distort it so that you will persuade. Somebody who states BS is somebody who just makes statements because he wants to be listened to. And whether what he says is true or not is of little concern to him. That's why when the AI chatbot started coming out, many authors actually called ChatGPT an automated BS engine. And that is really a reference to Harry Frankfurt. Because as we learned from the early versions of ChatGPT, hindi naman talaga search engine, di ba? Kaya nga tinawag na generative eh. It's making things up. And that is why nung isang interview mo sa akin, di ba? We talked about how oftentimes when I'm in conferences, I'm being introduced as a consultant to the World Bank, as chairman of the Management Academy of the Philippines,
That's still a
etc.
classic, no? It's a
and those
legend na. It's a legend.
and those are all examples of pure BS, right?
Mm.
So how do we now immunize people from BS? Well, it's just going back to what critical thinking is all about. So I think that's something we should be talking about. How to avoid BS.
Yeah. Actually, the first questions in my head are, as you said, it doesn't necessarily mean someone is lying, pero parang they don't necessarily care for the truth. So I don't know if how much of that is accidental and how much is intentional, because everyone wants to persuade, pero there are also people whose parang trade is to persuade. Leaders, for example, need to persuade. So parang does that mean the intention is to persuade na lang? Doesn't matter if you're persuading based on truth. Is that one
Well,
version of it?
well, yeah, I think you specify a very good example. A leader obviously is expected to be sincere. In
Mm.
which case, when he makes a statement to persuade, it should be grounded on the truth. So yun yung inaano natin
Okay.
na differentiation, yung grounding sa truth. Or if the leader is called out and told the statistic you're citing is outdated, this is the true statistic, so he will be more than appreciative and say, oh, thanks for calling me out, so let me check my statistics and get back to you. So
Mm.
you have a good discussion because you're both interested in the truth. But if somebody is just using misleading information, in World War II this was called propaganda, right?
Propaganda, yeah.
uh, that's where the problem is.
Oo.
Pero even propaganda is not exactly BS, because remember, a lot of propaganda in World War II were actually lies.
Mm.
So the ones stating them knew they were not true, but they were actually misleading those who listen.
So does that also fall under the BS definition we're trying to
No,
tackle?
no, and that's good that
Oh,
you're pointing this out, because we're not talking about that.
okay, got it.
BS, well, lying is an old-fashioned problem. We have to
Mm.
catch lying wherever it occurs, right? But now, with the proliferation of social media, which led to the fake news, in fact, post-truth nga eh, I don't know if you remember, 2016 Oxford Dictionary mentioned that the word of the year was post-truth.
Yeah.
Post-truth, meaning we had entered an era when emotion was the most important basis for deciding what to believe, not factual truth, right?
Oo.
You will remember a certain U.S. candidate said that he had a crowd in front of, the lawn in Washington when pictures showed that it was half empty. But they kept repeating it, and for most of the followers of this candidate, for them it was packed. It
Believed
didn't
it and
matter how many pictures were there. The important thing is how many and how quickly you could spread the meme that it was packed.
can I
That's
quickly contrast this with
mm,
kasi you're bringing to mind also some of the work that I do with the journalist sector. And
yes.
the most popular terms now is disinformation,
Mm-hmm,
misinformation,
mm-hmm,
malinformation.
mm-hmm.
So kunyari, at least the way we're understanding it, misinformation is unintentional. You just happen to share something na you thought was true because I saw it on a Viber chat with Prof. Ben Teehankee. I trust him.
Yes,
Yung pala,
yes.
it's a conspiracy.
Yeah, I think in that sense, misinformation overlaps with BS.
BS, okay.
In
Sa
that sense,
disinformation naman, there's a malicious intent
yes.
is to spread falsehood, yung
To
propaganda.
mislead,
Mm-mm.
to mislead.
So in
Yes.
that case, that's a little off our track right now. We're not necessarily tackling that type
Yeah,
of
because
falsehood.
that's always been a problem naman, and we're all told, pag nabubudol tayo, pagka nasiswindle tayo, we know we were being disinformed, right?
Okay, got it.
But misinformation or BS is a bit dangerous because it spreads innocently. I suppose like a virus, di ba? If you
Mm-mm.
remember during COVID, people who were not showing symptoms were being told that you could still be positive. And
Right.
if you're positive, you're actually the greatest spreader of all.
Mm-mm.
Because you're convinced that because you don't have symptoms, you're not infectious. You're the most infectious. Kaya it spread so fast, right? Not
Yeah.
because of those who were positive but
Very
had
viral.
symptoms.
Oh, I
It
mean
is,
viral in the
in the
knowledge.
literal sense.
Oh.
Oh,
Sige, okay. So misinformation closer, disinformation not. What about
yes.
malinformation, which is in a way a weird thing, no? You're spreading some facts, but they're meant to attack someone, you know?
Yeah, well, that's the most dangerous kind, 'di ba?
Mm-mm.
Kasi kaya nga meron tayong mga slander laws, anti-libel laws, precisely the dignity, reputation of people is precious, eh. That's part of their rights.
Mm-mm.
And nowadays, that can happen so quickly kasi everyone has a platform now, di ba? If you want to do character assassination in the old days, you had to invest to reach so many people. Now, anybody with a smartphone can smear anyone.
Okay.
And so I wanted to, because going back to BS, because this is really my advocacy, I recently submitted a position paper to CHED on the matter of AI.
Mm-mm.
Because I'm seeing this among my students very frequently now, that they're misusing AI and they're spouting a lot of BS.
Yeah.
Why do I say BS? Because precisely since they're not experts, they don't know that what the AI is saying is actually not true because they're
Yep.
not competent to judge this. So I've come up with a list of three major things that anyone can actually remember to make them almost completely BS proof eh. So may I share that with you?
Sige, let's do it.
Oo. Oh,
Oo.
yan lang naman eh. So ito yung tinatawag kong BS inoculation
Oo.
system.
Oo.
Ah. So the first one is that reality has layers. No? So we can think of an iceberg, for example. This is my favorite analogy. Most people, their idea of an iceberg is what they see above the water, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But anyone who studies the science of icebergs know that less than 10% of an iceberg shows above water. 90% is below it. So no matter how many icebergs you see, it doesn't mean you understand icebergs because there are deeper layers. Now, how does this apply? Obviously, everything we see from the map in your Waze, when you're watching using Waze, or when you're watching a movie, or when you're listening to a podcast, uh, all of that is just the tip of reality. But it is also real.
Yeah.
But never confuse that with the rest of reality. That's why I like the expression to deep dive. So that's the first rule. Since we know that reality has layers, never believe completely anything you see, you hear, you feel, you smell, anything from the senses is just the surface of things. So you need to take a deep dive. The second thing is we need to understand the causes of things. So this makes us really critical. So if something's happening, for example, if I were a young child, I'm watching a movie, so I'm watching big people moving on screen, and I'm very impressionable, right? Because that's an amazing thing to see when you're very young. But
Mm.
then I have to ask myself, but how does that happen? How do those images get on that screen? Are there really giant people? Are they really talking so loudly? How come my voice is not as loud as theirs? Then you begin to inquire, and then you look at the back of the movie house, you see light coming from it. Oh, it's coming from there. It's light. Then you discover that there's such a thing as a projector. Then you see behind the scenes, somebody shows you, oh, this is how that movie is made. All right. So this is how Tom Cruise jumps from the cliff, and he does this 7 times, and you see just one shot, and that's the perfect one. And you can see that there are cables, all of this. So he's not actually jumping, he's on a cable, but they do this for effect. So until we really understand the behind the scenes of something, which is the causality of it, we don't really fully understand it. All
Mm.
right.
Mm.
The third point is that always look for people who don't think like you. Why? Because obviously, any object we look at, for example, I'm looking at this clock, so I remember my time limit. But when I show this
Mm.
to you, you're seeing the back of it, right?
Yeah.
So if I tell you it's now 5:20 according to this clock, you wouldn't necessarily agree with me because I'm not showing you the front of it. So which means that to avoid BS, we need to seek as many diverse opinions as we can.
Mm.
But the problem with social media, as you know, is that we are being, herded into more and more like-minded groups, and we are being protected from each other's points of view. So
Oo.
that means we will never see the different side of things anymore, and we will think that a clock only has one side, right? So that those three things, if we just keep them in mind, that is, know that anything you see here is just the surface. Second, you don't really understand something until you have a clear picture of how it's coming about or what's causing it. And thirdly, you have to talk to people with as much diverse opinion as possible.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's my
Ah,
anti-BS formula.
no, that's very, very practical. And in a way, it's basics, no? You always
That's true.
verify.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I want to go into two tangents, siguro, from this, and thank you for sharing that. We should actually put that on a poster. These are the
Yeah, let's
BS
do
proof
that.
your life, no?
Let's make it a meme. Yeah.
Oo nga eh. Number one is how do we contend with and maybe for lack of a better term, just use politics. Kasi politics is
Mm,
part of it is, for example, someone who wants to prop up a brand
mm,
or highlight their supposed achievements in line with maybe it could be a commercial or non-commercial objective to be more famous, and then you ride on certain I don't know, signs of the times or trends. I don't know if you're detecting where I'm going with this,
Mm,
with the intention of persuading whether those trends are based on fact or not. And sometimes it's societal norms, no? For example, nowadays, and I hate to bring it up sometimes, very ideology wise, one of the most popular ideologies are something we would call woke ideologies. So
mm,
anything that
mm,
promotes
mm,
gender politics, racial politics, in some cases religious politics. So it's very, I mean, even to me it's very very blurry, because
mm,
to a
mm,
certain extent some of those are based on fact, but they've been stretched beyond, you know, I don't know, thresholds of verisimilitude. Eh. Parang,
mm,
okay, let's
mm, mm,
highlight it
mm.
na to the point na it's, for example, and I hate to use this, very popular, but it's more acceptable these days to be pro women but not pro men.
There is
Uh,
that trend, yes.
so okay, that's one angle. The other
Mm,
angle naman, and to just to make it richer, um, you mentioned AI, you mentioned social media. And these are algorithms that we're contending with, which may or may not have had any malicious intent. Let's just assume muna for the moment it was completely neutral. Let's
mm,
say in the
mm,
case of Facebook, the intention was to segment populations, nga, as you said, diba? But not realizing one of the best ways to segment people is hate speech and
mm, mm,
disinformation.
mm,
So the algorithms eventually found that, parang ano
mm.
lang yan, reinforcement learning,
Yes,
and they
yes.
found now, okay, this is the best way to accomplish the goal. Therefore,
Mm,
I'm going to push these messages.
mm,
It creates polarization. And even they, I mean, they meaning Facebook and similar platforms, are reluctant to openly admit that they are the cause of the spread of disinformation, because it feeds their business model. No? So
mm.
on the one hand, political BS in a nutshell. In the other hand naman, it's algorithmic powered BS with a commercial intent. I don't know which one is more tractable. Or anyway, how do you appreciate both, no, in this current discussion?
Yeah, so these are very rich issues now. On the first one,
Mm.
again, let's take a trip down history. No, if I don't know if you know rather Bernays. No, Bernays invented PR. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud,
Yeah.
and in the early 20s, Edward Bernays was genius enough, genius in quotes, to come up with a campaign to convince women to smoke. Because in
Okay.
the early 20s, many women in the world had just gotten the right to vote. Because prior to that, of course, the stereotype was women stayed at home, stayed in the kitchen, stayed in the bedroom. And so they did not have a political opinion, right? But because the suffragettes fought for almost 80 years, and finally women got the vote.
Yeah.
But the British American tobacco, those who sell cigarettes said, "Oh, our market is mostly men. How do we break the taboo against smoking?" Because women being seen smoking was seen as very unsightly. You know what Bernays did? He synchronized during the New York parade. He said to the journalists, "Women will light up torches of freedom." Because remember, the most important thing to women then was to be treated as equal because they now had the vote. And so all the journalists went to the parade. And sure enough, on the appointed time, women did light something. They all lighted cigarettes all at the
Mm.
same time. So this was splashed across all of the headlines all over the US. And overnight, nearly overnight, the taboo against women
Disappeared.
smoking disappeared and a
Uh,
fresh new market was born. And this was something that was harvested by 8 major tobacco companies, right? We know that. So
uh,
what did Bernays realize? That the way we think and talk about something changes the way we view that reality. And thus PR was born. And even now we know about events, PR, endorsers, etc. Businesses still do this. And politicians do this all the time. They want to influence the discourse because it is what will sway voters. For tobacco companies, it was tobacco sales. For politicians, obviously, it's votes. Now, the question is, how does the anti-BS approach help here? Let us again apply the same principles. Anything that is said by people is just the surface. For example, you were talking about, I think, social justice thinking, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
now very prevalent in the West, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a professor, so I might as well come out with it. Some of the most vulnerable to this are professors in the West. Many
True.
senior professors have been mobbed.
And students, pretty much.
Well, students, because they're lower in the
Hierarchies.
power hierarchy, they're really subject to this. But even professors are being unplatformed, mobbed, hit by. In fact, there's this famous assistant professor in Harvard who just lost her key position in Harvard because she dared to say that women are biologically different from men. As you know, in some quarters, this is absolutely taboo to even say.
Mm,
So
mm,
everything we learned in biology, which is what the DNA is, that the chromosomes of men and women are different. Many will not even allow you to say that because it's seen as a very critical statement that is oppressive of certain types of people who self-identify, either as trans or LGBT, etc. So for me as an academic, I'm always opening up these discussions, and sometimes I get into hot waters for this because I'm really interested to know. Okay, if you do say that, may I know why you think so? No, because remember the third principle, right? Look for people whose opinions are as different from you as
as
possible.
possible, yeah. To be
And I do
open-minded.
that. I
Mm,
know that. So even if I'm being mobbed, I follow the person and say, "Can we have coffee? I'm really interested in what you have to say." And then after a while we discuss, then I realize why they think that way. Because either in their personal experience or in the experience of people they love, they have felt that either their gender identity or their being a woman was a means to target them by
mm,
somebody who is more powerful. So I think I can empathize with that. But as you said, sometimes those who mean well, or maybe those who just want political power, can fan the flames of this resentment. And then
true.
everything goes to the extreme.
Mm,
This is the problem, no? So it was meant to really just give a voice to those who may have been traditionally marginalized, like the women who, after all, were given the vote so late. But then after a while, it swings to the other side and says every man now is a suspect chauvinist. Yeah. Of
yeah,
course
true.
you'll say that because you're a man, right? So that's how to unplatform a man. Of course you say that because you're a man, right? Like I didn't choose to be a man. How can you use that as a basis to attack me, right? But in many circles, that's simply acceptable. On the matter of AI now, on algorithmic, well, I think businesses were always clear that they wanted maximum revenue. For social media, that translated to a simple metric, which was engagement.
Tama.
Because the higher the engagement, the higher they can charge for advertising for all their clients.
Mm-mm.
And the metrics for engagement is fairly simple, right? How long does the user stay? And as you said, they found out that the simplest way to get people to stay was to fan conflict.
Hatred.
Yeah, well, we knew that. I mean, even when I was in high school, when we were having a boring day, we would just whisper to each other and say, "Oh, look at si ganyan and si ganyan," because we
Mm.
know they hate each other's guts. So we would just plant something na, "Oh, sama ng tingin
Just
sa'yo."
just to
See?
incite some ano
Yeah,
no, some
and then we would
attacks.
have entertainment after class. Now we go to the field and then we'll watch them fight each other. So this is not even an insight. Every high school student knows this. If you're
Mm.
bored, just pagsabong mo yung mga yan. Ano?
Yeah.
So this is now done algorithmically.
Oo.
The problem there is, of course, yung polarization, yung sinasabi mo. Because first of all, for democracy to work, we all have to be critical thinkers because otherwise we're just manipulated mobs, right? But more importantly, if we now divide people so that they cannot even have a civil conversation, you are slowly breaking down society itself.
Yeah.
So yan yung unintended consequence because of the algorithmic insight which any high school student actually knows na kung gusto mong tumingin yung mga tao, di ba pagsabong mo yung mga yan. So somebody who has more conscience has to step in. And you mentioned the EU AI Act, no? The EU AI Act is explicit. Cognitive behavioral manipulation is banned. So
Mm.
all of these companies that use captology or anything that uh, nudges you towards behaviors that you're not aware of, they will be closely monitored by the EU once the law enters into full force.
It's good thing you brought up the law or the emerging regulation in EU, because it's so much about this will just conflate many things, no, but might as well mention it. So much about ruling or deciding what is BS, especially in the light of anything political, or I mean even the algorithms for that matter, seems to depend on some power structure or authority,
Hierarchy, yeah.
'di ba? So, ah, daming problema. One issue I'm seeing is even the authority may have been undermined. Like for example, in the cases of social media, I'm just going to oversimplify. How come governments have not been able to curb these practices? Or it's open-ended question. I don't know. Could we just have banned Facebook? Or even go one level lower. The telco companies could have had something to do with it, but their excuse is, well, we're just a platform. We're just a pipe. We don't care about the content. You go after the content creator. In this case, Facebook is content. So one issue yun. In the other hand naman, let's go back to the social justice, the woke ideologies. That's essentially a criticism of the power structure to begin with. Like, feminists fight the patriarchy, etc.
Yeah.
So, yung palang the first attack is always against the authority. So to be using an authority to impose na, hey, look, regardless of gender, we should be recognizing people for their skills. And they're gonna say, oh, you're just being the patriarchal authority and not recognizing the special contribution. I'm just gonna use the gender arguments,
Mm,
probably the
mm,
most
mm.
relevant. So paano na yun, no? Kasi in a way, it disempowers and you said civil conversation. Who will ensure the civility of any conversation? We would be hard pressed to find, particularly back to social media, especially on Twitter and Facebook, a venue where it can be moderated. Parang ang
Yeah.
hirap eh.
Well, going back to higher education, the mission of higher education is to be that agent
Tama. Mm.
to promote forums for civil discourse. But as I mentioned, higher education is really under attack now.
Under
So
siege.
it cannot fulfill that role anymore. This is why I constantly raise difficult topics, even among university professors. And there is already a certain skittishness, I would say, because it's so easy to be caught on video saying something and then
Babanatan ka na after.
yeah, and you say 10 sentences, they get one sentence, and that is what they put on TikTok, and then you'll be mobbed, right?
Mm.
So it's so easy to lose a career. But really, this goes back to my original argument for critical thinking and dialogue. So we need to bring people, and you're doing this. I mean, those who do podcasts, at least those who are open-minded, are trying to have diverse opinions being exchanged,
Yeah.
or at least alternating, even if not in the same slot. You can listen to different speakers and then make up your own mind. That's the whole thing. So government is a little bit challenged because remember, government is also has a vested interest. One is of course staying in power for the leaders who are in position, but secondly, business produces massive amounts of taxes, and government cannot survive without taxes. So if you suddenly say a company, let's say a company is doing something egregiously wrong, and you cannot just shut them down because the government is calculating the revenue loss, and this is what makes it a little bit difficult.
Mm.
Now, if you look at the US, for example, the biggest companies providing all the taxes are the tech companies. Now, how do you tell these companies that, look, we're going to have to force you to change your business model? Suddenly, all that ad revenue will be halved, taxes will be halved, and then everything will just be. So that means there is a little bit of a conflict of interest. That's why this is where again citizens have to organize and fill in the gaps, because business and government, if left on their own, will just have this incestuous relationship of just patting each other's backs, and the citizens kind of get left out, no.
Yeah.
So citizens, journalists, as you pointed out, educators, and then independent content creators such as yourselves, you all have a role to make sure that we call out the inconsistencies that we see, the gaps that we see. For example, that's why I wrote a position paper to CHED, because
Which
although
is a
there
good
are
paper, by the way. Obviously, it's taking its time to
yeah, well,
cascade.
I had known that even before I filed it, because I have had advocacies with government in the past, and the last one I was involved in took me 5 years to even see it in print.
Wow.
So I played the long game because I'm an educator. But the point is, democracy means engagement. We don't just complain and take pot shots from a distance. We engage, we talk to companies, we talk to government agencies and get them to know that we are concerned about this. So the
Uh,
outcome cannot be guaranteed, but at least that's better than being disengaged.
Correct. Actually, just as a side note, I will remember to chase this separately. No, I think we need to do an information campaign based on your paper, not as a podcast, as in talagang as a,
Mm,
I don't know
mm,
what it is,
mm,
webinar. So I feel that while it's taking its time in the, in the halls of power, as it were, I think grassroots education is another angle we can pursue. And beyond the university scene, no, let's do some meetups about it. I don't know if with your permission, separately, maybe we can create derivative content
Oh,
about it.
sure. Yeah, I would love it if we do that. In
Kasi
fact, if you
kulang eh.
don't mind, I
Mm.
want to plug a little bit here, because one of my recommendations there is really basic stakeholder ethics.
Tama.
When companies create products or services, one of the core principles is what we call product liability, which
Yeah.
means that, if I were a car company, when I produce a car, there are standards to make sure that automotive engineers follow safety standards. If I were a pharmaceutical company, the rules are the same. There are safety standards for drugs. The problem with software engineering is that it's not a traditional profession. There is no PRC license for a software engineer, right? So they
Mm.
don't have a code of ethics, and yet they release more and more powerful things in the world. So my advocacy in the position paper is that since higher education, or for that matter, even basic education, is a stakeholder, meaning we are affected by the output of these AI quote unquote tools,
Tools.
because I even hesitate to call them tools, because for me a tool is something designed for a purpose, and I don't think they were ever designed for academic use. They're really language models. They were designed so that
Yeah.
software can look like it's a human being. Of course, the recent variations are more and more academic-like. But my main point is that I'm hoping that government will broker a collaboration among the tech developers and educators, so that they're working together so that they can make sure that the students learn better. I think nobody can disagree that we all want young people to learn better, to enjoy learning better, to be more productive, to be more curious, right? I only draw the line when they're already using these so-called tools in ways that are misleading them, misinforming them, and they're completely unaware. It's like you're carrying a virus and you're spreading the misinformation around. Oh, Dr. Teehankee went to Oxford. Oh, he's a consultant of the World Bank, and you're so confident because AI said so.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the things that it would really help if we send out the call that we want more cross-stakeholder collaboration. And I'm glad that with Sora, if you're following Sora, the
Is it
AI
out
tool.
na? Parang di pa, no? As
Well,
of
this is the thing, Doc.
mm,
I think OpenAI has learned from their experience with ChatGPT.
mm,
So in the Sora webpage, they're very explicit. We are not releasing this until we have had full engagement of all stakeholders, educators, artists,
mm.
the movie industry. So they now know that you cannot just release a tool without talking to people who will be affected. And
Tama.
that's basic. That's basic in product design. That's basic in business ethics. So I think that's something that we lost track of in the case of ChatGPT. But hopefully we can recover as the regulations, enter into force.
Ano rin eh. I'm gonna step back a bit, and because there are, I guess, tectonic plates moving around right now, no? And one of the biggest one is policy. And it has to do with critical thinking in the sense that we're going to be inheriting or borrowing a lot of approaches or principles, as it were, from the West. But I have yet to see, with the exception of your paper, or although your paper is kind of still in between, it still reflects kind of I would say a Western perspective. We're trying to be as
Mm.
objective as possible. This is a large language model. This is what they do. Tama naman yun. I feel that there's a uniquely Filipino perspective that's still missing. I'll give an example. No? For example, yes, big tech needs to play ball with government. But then at a macro level, we're generally a country of consumers of this tech. There's very little, and I'm just generalizing, movement in our own science and technology sector. There are efforts, obviously. I don't want to diminish them. Pero I don't think we're on the table as far as driving new forms of large language models as yet. So, in other words, while we're busy contending with the impact, let's just look at ChatGPT specifically, of ChatGPT on the academia. The people we want to hold to account are actually in California. In other words, if we talk to the software engineers here, for the most part, although there are some attempts to come up with a Filipino LLM or something we can use locally, they're also dependent on that. So parang naging three-way battle tuloy siya. You have tech and non-tech, and then you have, for lack of a better term, global north and global south. And I feel that that really makes our job, for example, as civil society educators and policy consultants, if as it were, more difficult. How does the Philippine government deal with that, knowing that the real power sits in the US? No, I don't know. I'm just airing that
Yeah,
as
it
something we
is.
need to contend with, diba?
It is a power asymmetry. You're right.
Mm,
But
mm.
if there's anything I have learned as a teacher in business, consumption power is the real power.
Is power for sure, for
It
sure.
is power. So, well, again, historically, if you remember the Intel
The chip.
Pentium bug issue, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Intel was, a master of the universe in chip making. And then it was discovered that the Pentium chip had an error, I think, in the 14th floating point decimal. I mean,
Wow.
that error would only affect maybe the most sophisticated engineering application. The problem was the bug leaked, right? And
Mm.
so what did Intel do? Well, they said, well, it's a non-issue. You can still trust the PCs with Intel. But, they completely miscalculated.
Kaya nagka-Pentium 2 bigla.
Yes, the
Oo.
wave of, grandmothers who had bought PCs for their grandsons' graduations
Yung original
wrote
Pentium, bulok
wrote
agad.
hate letters to Pentium and say, "How dare you give me a defective product?" And then it
Mm.
snowballed. And Andy Grove, the CEO of Intel, then publicly apologized. He
Yeah.
said, "We completely misjudged how much you needed to trust us, and therefore we're recalling this. It is a defective product. We apologize."
Mm,
So the
mm.
same is true now. We are either number one, two, or three among the social media customers of the
Consumers.
world.
Oo.
So if we really just get our act together, we can sway. And remember, all of these tech companies have local offices. They can be summoned by Congress. They're not
Yeah.
immune. The
Although they're
moment,
mostly sales offices though. I just
for
want to point
sure,
that out. Yeah.
for sure, and that's where the money is made.
Yeah.
Sales is where money is made, right? That's
Mm.
why if you want to influence someone, you have to talk to his pocket. It's always been that way. So
Oo.
I don't think we should be powerless, but the problem is, Doc, and you and I know this, the social media sphere where we can ideally muster this collective action is itself tainted because there's already so much manipulation in social media. So we need neutral grounds. That's why I think in academe, or I think in the halls of Congress, we can talk about these things in a way that we know algorithms are not involved. Because anything we discuss in social media now, we know is algorithmically compromised
Yeah.
because everything depends on those metrics, right? So I think that's why the anti BS campaign is very important.
No,
That
no, I'm liking it.
Mm.
We should certainly put out mga quote cards.
For
So,
sure, for
shortly
sure.
after this, no,
Oo.
pag-usapan. Hindi, tsaka, for example, sige, I'll give another micro scenario, and I'll use myself as the guinea pig. So I've been doing this content for Gen AI mostly for about a year already. No, it's been a 1 year anniversary since our first chat. No, April din last year yun, somewhat. And And I think it's been helpful for the most part because I get a lot of positive feedback. But
Mm-hmm.
then I think I've been doing it too long. you do something too long, there will be negativity, and I actually appreciate the
Mm,
criticism,
mm,
no.
mm,
But some of the criticisms border on the, in my view, parang ano lang eh, parang, I mean, I'll give you an example. Parang Doc makes things, oversimplifies things. That's one.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And then talking about this podcast being one of the few, no? Parang some of the, well, comment, not really a feedback, but comment that parang Doc wants to monopolize the
mm,
conversation.
mm,
And for me, I hear it, I think about it, and I wonder, why is it my problem that few others
mm,
bother to talk about what I talk
mm,
about? By
mm.
all means, no? I'll even help you out if you want to start
Sure, sure,
talking.
yeah.
So,
Mhm,
the point I'm trying to make here is I'm making uh I'm making a call on my own to not necessarily consider certain types of feedback because I don't know how to act on it. Like those two are the least helpful feedback I've had so far. But if it implies that I should stop doing what I'm doing, I don't think I will. But that now, is it now incumbent on me to help more voices step up? Perhaps, but that's purely voluntary on my part. It's not my obligation
sure,
to
sure,
create
yeah.
more content creators, even if I could. So, okay, the question I want to ask you is, I could be making a critical error making that call. Kasi I have to be fair then, no? Parang, okay, by choosing to ignore certain feedback, Doc, you might actually have decided to ignore a really important piece of feedback, and now you're off in a direction where, slippery slope. But then how is the opposite even tenable, no? If I consider that, does that mean I have to be cowed into submission now? Okay, mukhang may nagagalit that I'm talking. Parang mali din yun. I don't know. How do you deal with that from a BS perspective? Or is that BS feedback also?
Well, uh, our premise is we're in a democracy, so we
Yeah,
really want the marketplace of ideas. So any suggestion that somebody will self-censor, especially if he's putting himself out there and others can comment on what he says, that's that's really not on the table as far as I'm concerned. It's a marketplace of ideas. So
true.
if you think Doc is saying things that you don't disagree with, what I would say is, Doc, can you give me time in your program? I want to talk about the
Yeah,
other side of this issue.
yeah.
And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of having these kinds of forums.
Mhm.
People can make up their own minds. But, I kind of, the thing with social media is it's so easy to make character attacks or ad hominem comments
Yeah.
or to impute motives, right? Like you're monopolizing or you're uh you know I've seen all sorts of adjectives. I avoid adjectives. I'm a strictly
Yeah, yeah.
verb.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
a strictly noun and verb guy. The reason is because I cannot, if somebody says you're gaslighting me, excuse me, I saw that movie and I've read everything on gaslighting. It has to do with,
that's a popular word, gaslight. No,
yeah,
so
in other
from
words,
time to
it
time I have to look it up. Parang ano na naman tong gaslighting na to?
well, you have to watch the original movie. The point is, if my view of the world doesn't agree with yours, that's a defense. You're gaslighting me.
Yeah.
But according to my principle three, we have a diverse point of view. And I
Mm,
suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we will discover it if we stay engaged.
yeah.
But if we reject each other's views out of hand, then we will go farther and farther away from the truth. And worse, we will become polarized and we will become, disenchanted with each other, with society. So I think media, especially the modern form, what we call the new media, you have a special role to be resilient and to persist. Others will really feel bad that their point of view is not the same as what they see, but that is not your problem. Although giving them a platform might be something you can voluntarily do.
Yeah.
I've seen some social media practitioners who really make a practice of alternating. So they take an issue, the diversity of it, then they guest one person, and then they guest another person, and then I think that's the way we will work through these things that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I've chosen to adopt, obviously, parang ano yan, moving objects yan,
Yeah.
or moving targets. Right now, apart from those three principles you've mentioned, which resonates with me very much, and the reason why I actually embarked on this journey to just air out as much. And I'm not pro or anti AI per se. I just want to see,
Mm,
okay,
mm,
guys, this is what
mm,
it looks like.
mm, mm.
Everyone has a right to think for or against. But what I'm hearing more, this is the majority of the opinion, is we didn't realize pala, Doc, that that was a thing
Mm,
until you brought it up.
mm,
I said,
mm.
yeah, okay, that means it's a good thing. But what I was saying about my North Star here is at least let's inform people and
Yeah.
let them make decisions. Because then at least it's a service, and it's something I enjoy doing anyway. Now, whether that later foments certain perspectives or opinions or positions, then those can be taken case to case. Like your paper is a position, which I agree
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
It's born out of information that we provided. I mean, dati nga, we were even arguing about, everyone seems to cast a wide net, no? Pag sinabing AI, it's everything, no?
Mm,
Only
mm,
to zero in of, oh, yeah, yeah, it's everything, but it's these particular traits of Gen AI that are causing the problem. And then side by side with the fact that everyone can easily access it and use it, and there are no existing guidelines. We're far away from that already, but we're not quite there yet. And then you have impending possible regulation. It's really complex, no? And then
very.
bottom, yeah, and
It
then
will
bottom line
become
is,
even more complex. Yeah.
yeah, and it will get more complex. But bottom line is, I'll go with what adds value to people, and they're free to tell me what adds value to them. Very ano nga recently, I don't know if you caught this. I'm starting a fanfic, a fan fiction.
Oh, really?
And
Interesting.
I'm gonna do I don't know, well, it's still in its starting stages, but I'm gonna do a kind of a caricature of things that I find well worth poking at. No, it's kind of a satire slash polemic. And my opening salvo is two characters. One is Nosebleed and one is
Mm,
Jargon. And
mm,
I feel that they are two of the most maybe unintentional villains of the AI space.
mm,
See, Nosebleed just loves, bleeding everyone's noses with all
mm,
this
mm,
high end stuff, which is unfortunately par for
mm,
the course if you start
mm,
talking about,
mm,
I don't know, neural networks. And then there's jargon. They're related, but they're not
mm,
quite the
mm,
same. Maybe they're both variants of BS. Kasi
mm,
si
mm,
jargon naman, talks big eh. Dami yung mga
mm,
management speak.
Tech
But then,
speak, yeah.
oh, but when you dissect, the person never really said anything of value. Not only
Mm,
did they
mm,
confuse, you
mm,
actually feel empty. I'm
mm.
speaking from experience. Parang, ano yung sinabi niya?
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
especially if they get interviewed on the radio or on TV. I've had my fair share of interviews as well. And I try as much as possible learning from experience and feedback. Na, pinagsabihan ako live minsan Doc, pangmasa tayo so,
Mm,
avoid the big words, tell them
mm,
what's relevant to them. And that was a big transition for me. Unfortunately, not everyone has that maybe awareness perhaps. And then jargon comes in and just talks big stuff, pero no one got anything. And why do I even bother? Well, I guess the common ground is if we want to make AI useful and friendly and safe, these are the first things that have to go. We have to find ways of communicating. I mean, it's not
Indeed.
simple.
Indeed, yes.
Anyway, yun lang. I just wanted to share that
Yeah.
as a quick
And I'm
input.
glad you mentioned that because, science communication is a major field. In fact,
Yeah.
I have only the highest respects for the most skilled science communicators because
Yep.
you have to really educate the public on science because science affects all of us.
Mm-mm.
And but it's a struggle. Certainly that's one of my favorite uses of language models, by the
To
way.
simplify.
Yeah, I
Oo.
just tell it because I have a lot of classes with very technical concepts. I just say it or explain this at a grade 10 level. And he does it very well.
Oo.
Or explain this in a song based on
Taylor
Taylor
Swift.
Swift's song.
May ganyan ka palang mga racket,
Oh,
Okay.
I've done that for a long time, ever since ChatGPT came out,
Oo.
because it is a language model, and
Mm,
as you said, jargon and highfalutin language is becomes a wall of understanding.
mm.
But if we can use language to engage, to make people deeply understand na, yun pala yun,
Yeah.
then we're doing a public service,
Oo.
right? obviously, if we cannot bring them, I remember when the Samsung Note 7 started bursting into
Blowing up, no?
flames. You will remember, right? So
Oo.
there was a total recall, but some friends I had who Filipinos were so sentimentally attached to their phones, they did not surrender it. In fact, although there was a ban of taking it on any airline, they would still bring it. I said, ang tigas ng ulo mo, pare. Bawal nga yan dyan kasi pagka lumiyab yan, baka mag-crash yung buong aeroplano. Shh, tahimik lang, ganyan, ganyan. Because they did not have an understanding. And you know, I admired Samsung because not only did they do the total recall, they communicated every step of the investigation,
Yeah.
even the tracing of the cause. It was a battery that was badly produced so that the corner was hitting into some of the circuitry and causing a short
Meltdown.
circuit.
Mm.
So once you, that's why principle number two is, what is the cause? Di
Oo.
ba? Hindi yung sasabihin mo, oh, bulok yan, lipat na tayo dito sa mga,
But why,
uh,
no?
di
Oo.
ba? Dapat alamin mo why. I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Doc, there was a time when there were claimed sudden unexplained acceleration for the Montero, if you
Montero, yeah.
remember.
You know, that stuck to me, ah. I'm afraid of those cars.
It stuck to me too because I wrote a column about it that the government promised that they would release a report on the causality of that. It
And they
never
never
came
did.
out.
Never did.
It
Oo.
never came out. So for me, that's always a disservice to the people. Sure, you can claim, you know, these housewives don't know how to drive, sinasaway nila yung anak nila sa likod, ang ingay-ingay, instead of stepping on the brake, they stepped on the gas, kaya daw nangyari yun. Maraming mga ganon. Pero sabi ko, yeah, that's all possible, but I want the full report. Why can't you release the full report so that we will fully understand, di ba, what SUA is all about? Eh, hindi nga eh. Hindi lumalabas eh. At least in the case of the Boracay situation, you remember nung pinasara yung Boracay, it was very clear. The basis was the E. coli concentration was just so high, and we know E. coli comes from human waste, right?
Yeah.
Imagine ibibida mo yung beach mo that gets $10 billion a year from tourists, tapos yung E. coli ganun kataas. So everybody knew
Yeah.
that it was really gonna make people sick. So even when you argued na, we will lose revenue and so on and so forth, hindi. Talagang they put their foot down. Of course, it helped that somebody in Malacanang could not be
Yung point
budged,
ko,
right?
to segue kanina, there was an
Mm.
authority that
Yes,
drew the line.
exactly. Oo,
I
yeah.
feel tuloy, and I'm not wishing for authoritative approaches, pero minsan that's necessary eh. And if you can't find common ground,
Hmm.
there has to be an arbiter. And in many of these problems with BS, walang arbiter. Or at least walang
Oo.
obvious arbiter.
Well, kasi nga minsan implicated ang pera eh.
Mm.
Usually, in my experience, it's money that makes things fuzzy.
Yeah.
Because, well, like I remember in the Boracay case, the local resorts really appealed to Malacanang, claiming they will lose $9 billion a year, right? But
Mm.
somebody had to say, well, it's a health issue.
Mm.
Anyway, you will bounce back better. We'll just clean it up first. And then it was revealed that so many of the resorts did not even have STPs, no? Wala silang sewage treatment plants. Ibig sabihin yung
It's
human
crazy.
waste talaga was going straight to the water. My God, how can you justify that, di
And
ba?
you're taking a bath in it and,
Exactly,
sunbathing in it.
but none of the executives were in the water, noticeably, because they
Oh.
knew what was going on. So
Oh.
ang point ko is that if you want business to thrive, we have to make sure everything we do is trustworthy. Ito din naman yung point ko sa AI eh. Because of course, nagka-first mover advantage. Ano. By the way, I think you're an easy target kasi one, you're a communicator eh. Second, you communicate on technical matters. So very few will do what you're doing. So
Mm.
it's a matter of, happenstance. Nagkataon. That's why you're an easy target. But I think you're doing an important service. The others should
Yeah.
do it too.
Par for
Diba?
the
But 'di ba? But
I think,
but you
no?
know, ganyan talaga, nauna ka eh. So ganyan talaga. But the key point is keeping focus on making people informed. So itong nangyari diyan sa AI, ang feeling ko ganun din.
Mm-mm.
Kasi nga large language models train on so much data and it's so data hungry. So they had to get all data, non-curated data. There's really a lot of E. coli in that data. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's true. Mm.
Nandun na yun eh. That's why I believe, like many, I mean, hindi naman unified din ng AI industry. You know this, no, di ba? Sila, Yan LeCun, for example, said, uh, transformers will not survive.
Yeah.
Kasi nga, the way transformers are trained are deeply sensitive to tainted data eh.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if it's done for private companies, all the data come from the company. Iba yon, curated yun, di ba?
Yeah.
Ang problema sa mga foundation models, it was trained on publicly available data from the internet, including Reddit, All
Mm.
of these things that alam naman natin are the E. coli of the internet, di ba? So, yun ang problema. Ako kasi quality practitioner ako eh. So I'm always suspicious of approaches that clean products at the end rather than designing it properly from the beginning.
Yeah,
Kaya I'm looking at yung Phi model ng Microsoft is much much smaller, one-fifth the size, no?
the size, but
Di-
seems to perform at the same
Yeah,
level.
comparably, and of course, yung pinopropose ng Nian LeCun of Meta, which is yung JEPA, kasi
Mm.
that has a model of the world. It's not just based on surface, kasi nga, remember principle one, right? Reality is not the tip of an iceberg, it's the whole iceberg. The problem with transformer models is it's just getting trillions and trillions of tips. It's like
Mm.
shaving all of the tips and then putting that into equations. It's not going under. That's
No.
not what it does. It
Yeah.
just looks at patterns of tips. So on the surface, it can look plausible, but it's never really going deep. So I think after this initial, love affair we have with transformers, and I love them as language models, better models will come out which will really go into deep dive into knowledge itself, what things really mean, what causality means, etc. So there will be less E. coli, no? But I think you're right, government has to step in. So
Step in. Eh.
hopefully with these three messages we can launch our anti-BS campaign. Remember, everything is not what it appears.
ABC, anti-BS campaign.
Yeah, tama, our ABC campaign, ano? Point one, everything is not what it appears to be. You have
Mm.
to dig deeper. Second, look for the causality of things. Until you get that, you don't really understand. Third, don't be in a bubble. Talk to
Yeah.
people whose views make you uncomfortable. You don't have to agree with them, but if you talk to them long enough, you will see what's missing in your point of view and you will be better for it.
Yeah, I mean that's really good. In fact, it does intersect with a lot of philosophical movements, which I would love to talk to you in another episode.
Oh, don't get me started there.
Yung mga skeptical empiricist, naive
Yes.
empiricist, you mentioned
Critical realism.
critical
Yes.
realism,
Yes.
etc. No, those are really good. Sige, we're at the hour,
Yes.
unfortunately, again. And you mentioned your three. Anything that you'd like to leave as a breadcrumb for everyone? Because sabi ko nga sa'yo, I'll probably re-air all of the Ben Teehankee episodes, even the very, very first one from Data Ethics, because I always come out of these chats with you. Well, obviously, bitin palagi, but second, there's really a lot to process, and I think I want to get better at this by, in a way, extracting some of that, putting it in some other derivative content. But anyway, but back to you. Anything you'd like to leave people with, in preparation for the next conversation and the current state of things now with AI?
Yeah, I'd like to invite everyone to really fully engage with AI. This is one of the most fundamentally transformative development in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not something that we should leave to the tech companies alone. We have
Tama.
a voice in this. So we should have more forums, not just from Doc, but from everyone, so that companies can listen to us. And together, we can evolve something that will really be truly humanistic. My advocacy really is humanistic AI that makes us come out as better versions of ourselves, not the polarized, manipulated, social media addicted versions that we're seeing. So we need to make sure AI is there to help us flourish. So that's an open invitation to everyone. Get into AI, but follow the ABCs. Follow the ABCs of anti-BS.
And with that, yeah, I want to thank Prof. Ben Tehanki again for gracing the show. And yeah, looking forward to our next chat. Thank you, Prof.
Wonderful opportunity, Doc.